Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Today we're going to be working on another project and I'm not quite sure what it'll be yet. Last week I received these upholstery and vinyl fabric samples, so I figured that's what we could work on today. I plan on making one bag for the video, but I'll also be doing a time trial as well. I think there's enough fabric in here for me to make 10 bags. I'm not quite sure what kind of bags they're going to be. And I think what I will do today is use these three pieces together. So we've got this upholstery fabric, and then I've got the dark red and the grey colour. So those three will go together. These will go together as well, and I think they'd look much nicer. But I'm going to be sticking with the layout that's in the swatch sample. So we'll go with that colour today. I'll go and pull all of this apart and we can get started. I'll also quickly just whip up the bag now so that I can show you what the finished product is. Whilst I'm standing here yakking away, I do just want to mention that I've changed the position of the camera at my machine because I've had some problems with focus right in front of the machine. Let me know what you think of the new position, if you like the other position better or this one. I'd love your feedback. Let me quickly go and whip this bag up and then I'll be right back. This is what we're making today. We've got one piece of vinyl on one side, the other on around the back. I've cut the matching upholstery piece in half, fully lined, and we've got some nice neat zipper tabs on the top there. So come along, I will show you how to make this zippered pouch using those vinyl pieces. And I'll explain what my batch sewing processes are as I go along as well. Let's get to it. First thing I've got to do is pull apart the book. And they're all a little bit different in the way you get them open, but there's lots of staples inside them. And lots of glue as well. So I've got the outer layer off and there's heaps of big staples in here. So I've just got to prise that apart. Apart from all the staples in here, this one's not too bad so far. I've been asked what I do with these hangers when I remove them from the cards. I've actually been hanging onto them trying to think up a project for them, but somebody did suggest that they would be really good in the shoe bags. So I might actually revisit the shoe bag video and figure out a way to put these in there. What do you think? That piece of fabric is going to be very useful, even though it's faded down the centre. It's still got plenty of usable bits in it. All I have to do is get rid of the staple holes at the top and the glue. I'll just chop that bit off. These plastic envelopes that the care label comes into are really handy for vinyl projects as well. So I do hang on to some of these. I hang on to the white card because Chris and I use that for pricing stock in the shop. So nothing's getting wasted except for this plastic on the back. Normally I would take this to the heat press and give it a good press to release the glue fibres on here, but because I've got vinyl pieces, I'm not going to do that today. But this is like a plastic or a vinyl on the back. So this will just peel off. And it'll take a lot of the adhesive with it, and then I should be able to get these apart. So this sticky bit at the top here, I'm not going to be able to do anything about that. Now somebody did mention in our Facebook group the other day that there was a product that removes sticky or adhesive residue from vinyl. I don't have any, so I'm not going to be able to try that today, but I'm just going to cut around these areas and use what I can. I think the staple holes will be okay if I remove those carefully and give that a good rub. I'll see if I can use that. If not, I might be able to put my label there. We'll find out soon. So the rest of them will peel away just as easily. This is the fabric sample and these are the vinyl samples. These are the ones that are going to go together in a project as well as the other sets. And I think by the time I chop off the paper and the sticky residue, I'll have some good usable pieces in there. So I will keep these sets together and then just peel off the rest. I've separated all the fabric from the sample cards. Of all the fabric and the entire sample card, this is the rubbish that we have. I can remove these staples and the metal bits and they can go into the recycle bin. The plastic will have to go into the bin. So these can be recycled, and this is the rubbish for landfill. Then I've got a couple of hangers here. I'll set those aside for a future project. Kept the card so that Chris and I can use that pricings. I've kept the little vinyl envelope for a project. And then I've got all of these pieces here, which will allow me to make 10 bags. And with the larger piece, I think I'll end up making 11 bags out of it because I do have a larger piece of vinyl as well. So that's what I'm going to do today. I have factored all of this into my time trial when I work on these kinds of projects. Even though I don't charge for the fabric because it was free to me, I do charge the processing time to get it to a standard that I can use it for sewing. Let's get started. All right, I've gone and cleaned up all the fabric. After tidying it up, these are all the bits that are going into landfill. They've got sticky residue and big chunky bits of glue, so that will go in the bin. But I've managed to square everything up and I'm going to be able to make 12 bags. I've got a larger piece of upholstery fabric and then 2 smaller pieces of vinyl, and I'll be able to make up these sets of bags. This will be gorgeous. So I've got all those, and then that larger piece of green fabric that I had in the background and the larger piece of vinyl, I've cut those two in half and I can put those 2 pieces together, and then I've got a couple of pieces left that I've trimmed up and I'll just make a small bag with those 2 pieces. So now that we've got all the fabric cut up, let's get started with our project. So these are the fabric pieces that I'll be using today. I think I'm going to ignore the staple holes because I think that when I make the bag, it's not going to be noticed as much as what I'm noticing them now. And because I've got my vinyl strips the same length here, I'm actually just going to go and sew these together. For the upholstery fabric, I've got 25 by 21.5 centimetres, which is 10 by 8.5 inches. Then I've got 2 strips of vinyl, which is 25 by 11 centimetres, or 10 by 4.25 inches. I will also need some lining, a zip, some zipper tabs, and my labels. I'll pop everything you need up on the screen now. First thing we need to do is put our fabric back together again to make one usable piece. And after we've done that, we can work out what size we need for our linings. I'm using double-sided tape to join my fabric together. The one I'm using is able to be sewn through without leaving a sticky residue on your machine or on your needles. And I'll pop a link in the description for the brand that I've been using lately. Remove the paper, place the upholstery piece right side together, lining up those edges. Place some double-sided tape on the other side and place that right side down as well. What I need to do now is sew down both long edges here. After I've done that, I can top stitch. When I do batch sewing like this, I like to do all my pieces together, so each one of these sets of fabric have got the narrow strips secured to the larger strip, These can all now go to the machine and have these side seams stitched together. The next step after that is to open it out and decide which way I want my top stitching to go. Okay, here's my new camera angle. We'll see how this goes. I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance for this project, and all I'm going to do is sew straight down the ends. I've got all my other sets of fabric with me as well. Once I've done this one for our tutorial, I'll go and sew all of those. Not everybody has access to larger sized needles, so for today I'm going to be using a 90 or a size 14 needle. And normally for upholstery fabric I would use something a little bit larger, but I don't want to have big holes in my vinyl either, so I'm sticking with the 90s. Flip it around and do the same on the other side. I'm not sure if you can see, but I have a couple of markings on my machine here that I've just put on with a Sharpie. This is my 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam line, and I follow that when I'm trying to sew straight. Once you've sewn the pieces together, you'll need to top stitch. A lot of the times the fabric will tell you which way it needs to go. In this case, the seam underneath is wanting to face the upholstery fabric rather than the vinyl. And because the vinyl is so stiff, it's actually sensible to sew onto the upholstery fabric. So I make sure my seam now faces the upholstery fabric in the centre, and that will be where I top stitch. Now I would have gone and sewn all of my fabric pieces together first, and then I'll do all the top stitching after that. For the top stitching, I'm going to increase my stitch length, and I've increased that to 4.5. Now, regardless of the colour of fabric that I'm using, I'm just going to be using a medium coloured grey thread for the entire project. So I've got the grey thread on there. When I do the top stitching for the zip, I'll be using the same grey thread that will probably be onto the vinyl. I haven't decided yet. I find that the greys work really well on coloured fabric. Top stitching onto this stippled area here works really well because there are so many different shades in there as well. So now that I've done that with my other pieces, I'll go and do all the top stitching all at once as well. I finished piecing and top stitching all of these samples. So once you've got this piece here, find the centre in this section here. Mine measures close enough to 8 inches that I'm just going to measure 4 inches across. I've got the 4-inch line here lined up with the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to cut straight across here. That's going to give me 2 equal pieces. When I put the front and back together, I'm going to have a vinyl at the bottom and a vinyl at the top, and this will be how the bag looks. And I'll be able to hide the worst of the staple marks with my label. So I'm just going to pop my label on over the top there. I'll centre it, of course. This is now the finished size of my front and back pieces. I need to cut lining the same measurement. I can then go and cut up all of these as well as my lining pieces. I've gone and cut out all the lining pieces for all of the bags that I'll be making. What I've also done is applied the double-sided tape that I'll be using for my zip to each piece. So all of these lining pieces and outer pieces have double-sided tape attached to every single one of them. They're ready now for the zips to be put in. I've cut all those up as well. So for this one, we have our lining and our outer fabric, and I don't want to have my vinyl on the same side. I want to flip it over like this. So I have the upholstery fabric in opposite directions as well as the vinyl. So we need to prepare our zips and we need to prepare our bags. If you don't have double-sided tape, just use clips. I'm running a strip of tape along the top edge of all of my pieces. With my double-sided tape attached to the top edge of all of my pieces, I can take my zip. The zip needs to go across here This piece is 10 inches wide or 20 centimetres. To make really nice corners on the top of the bag, I need my zip to be 2 inches shorter. So my zip now is 8 inches or 20 centimetres. If you don't have continuous zips, you can use a regular zip, but you want to cut off the metal bar at this end, and you want to make sure you bring the slide into the middle of your zip somewhere so that it doesn't come off. And then you can trim off the edge and measure up the 8 inches that you need, or whatever size you need. Once you've done that, and I would just put some adhesive tape across here to hold that together. Once you've done that, you can follow the same steps for the rest of it. If you're using a continuous zip, you'll want to put your slide on, open the teeth up with a curved edge facing you. Now, before I opened my teeth up, I've made sure that the edge of the tape here is nice and even. Pop the slide on, gently pop the other side on, and try and keep this nice and even at the top. Push that. And if you've started with an even edge here, you should end with an even edge. You don't want your zipper teeth to kink down one step. And if you've got that nice and even here, then you're going to have a nice even distribution of teeth along here. You pop that in the centre. Let's take our tabs. Your tab needs to be as wide as your zipper tape. So if I were using a regular dress zip, I could get away with a narrower strip of fabric. Today's piece is, I think it's 4 inches long, which is about 10 centimetres. Fold it in half. If this were a printed fabric, I'd have the printed side faced up, and then I'd fold the fabric together. So with the printed side, I would place my zip over the top, fold that over, and secure the end. I'd do the same for the other side. And then all you need to do is take this to the machine and sew down both ends of the zip. And that'll give you a really nicely finished end to your zips. Now, because I'm making a whole batch of these bags, what I've done here is cut up all my zips to the sizes that I need. This little one is for the upholstery bag, and I've got one long strip of fabric that is the 4 inches to wrap around the end of the zip. I've tucked all my zip ends inside, and then I've done the same on the other side. I almost forgot to put all my sliders in as well, but luckily I picked that up early. So for these ones, I'm going to sew all the way down on both sides, and this one here, if you just want to prepare one zip, you'll just sew down the ends here. Let's go do that. I'm just stitching in about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Repeat for the other side. To do the bulk lot, I'll just sit that straight under the machine and sew all the way across. Where the coil is, I like to triple stitch over that, so I'll go forward, back and forward on each one. Once I've done one side, I just go down the other. With these ones all done, it's just a matter of separating the fabric here and then opening out each one. I can also trim the fabric on the sides to match up with the zipper tape. I'll set those aside for the other bags. Let's work on this one. All you need to do is push out the tabs and we can put this into our bag now. Having my label on the front here, I'm going to have the curved edge of my zip facing the left. So you want to have your slider faced down, and we're going to centre that over the top of the fabric so that you've got an even distribution of zipper tape across your fabric. You don't want to have it all the way over one end or the other. Have it centred nice and evenly. Remove your paper. I just run my thumbnail along the edge to help separate the paper from the adhesive. And you can usually eyeball this. When you're happy with that, line it up. You can of course measure the centre of the fabric and the zipper tape if you want to. But when you're doing batch sewing, you want to try and save as much time as you can. So we've got that flap secured to the bag. This one here needs to stay over as well. Grab your lining and place that over the top of your outer fabric. If this were a printed piece of fabric, I would have the printed side facing. Line up the side edges, and once you're happy with the side, then you can line up the top edges. Once you've done that, flip it over, take this to the machine and sew straight along here. We're not going to top stitch just yet. We'll do that once we've put the other side of the zip on. When I'm doing batch sewing in particular, I always make sure I keep my groups of fabric together. So here I've got my outer and my lining and the one that I'm about to sew together. I'll keep that together and then I'll prepare the next lots of fabric and do exactly the same. So that way I'm not getting any sizing mixed up and I know everything's going to work well together. So just as I've done with the single piece of fabric, I'll now go and do exactly the same with each one of these. I'll do an outer and a lining, but then I'll make sure I grab the other outer and lining and keep those together until I've sewn one side of the zip in. When you sew these zips in place, have the heavier fabric at the top. It's less likely to move on you when you do that. We've sewn the lining and the zip together on one side. What you want to do is just push the lining to the back of the outer fabric, and you do want that sitting nice and flat. And if it's going to be a nuisance for you, you can go and top stitch this now so that it does sit flat. But because I'm making a whole batch of bags, I want to do all the top stitching all at once because I'm increasing my stitch length. And I don't want to go from a small stitch length to a big one every time I do something. So I'll do all of these zips first, and then I'll do the top stitching with a larger stitch length. With the other outer fabric, we can line up these edges here with these edges. So as long as you have the side edges nice and straight, you can then move the zipper tape up to be in line with your fabric. Secure those edges together, then grab the other piece of lining and we can place that over the top. And you also want to line up the side edges of the lining and then the top of the fabric. And you can see at the top here, we've got the lining on the edge here, the outer fabric, they line up nicely, and at the other end. We can take this back to the machine, sew along the top edge here. Once we've done that, you'll open out your outer fabric and separate the lining. We'll increase the stitch length to, I think I had 4.5 for this section of top stitching earlier. I'll do the same thing here. Then we'll top stitch on both sides of the zip, but we're going to top stitch from the edge of the zipper tab to the other edge of the tab. We're not going to top stitch all the way from one end to the next. So once again, we've got the sturdier fabric at the top. When you get to the zip pull, raise your presser foot and move the slider out of the way, and you can continue on. With that done, open out your fabric, separate the lining. We're going to increase the stitch length to 4.5. Because I'm sewing over the top of vinyl, I'm going to put my vinyl foot back on as well. Okay, I'm ready to go. I usually have my index finger in between the layers of the lining and the outer fabric, and I'll pull it taut like this. That way the lining doesn't pop back over the zip and I don't have to keep stopping and starting. And because I'm using upholstery fabric, I'm actually going to do my top stitching a little bit further away from the edge, and that'll help keep everything sit nice and flat. Again, I'm starting where the tab and the zip meet. And I don't even have to turn around, I can just go to the other side and start in the same position. Now that we've done the top stitching on both sides, you've got that nice and neat underneath. You can chop off any excess tabs that you might have. And at this point you want to make sure that your zip is open at least halfway. Don't move your slider too far over to the left because we still have to sew up our side seam, and sometimes these little wiggly bits get in the way and you'll break your needle. So that will just open up along there. I won't be putting any side tabs on these bags. I'm going to be using some pulls on my zips, and that just helps reduce some of the time it takes to make the tabs. So if you want to put a tab on each end or just on one end, you can do that now. You would sew it just along here, making sure the lining's out of the way. What we can do here is bring these two pieces together and move the zipper tab toward the lining, and then just fold the outer fabric across. So you're continuing the fold in the fabric from the zip being installed. Line up this corner section here, and this is where we're going to start sewing. We've got fabric that'll meet up on the seams here, and you want to lock those together, and at the other end we'll do the same. Push the tab toward the lining, allow the fabric here to be folded across and meet at the top there. Align these seams here. Usually what I like to do, whether I'm doing one bag or 10 bags, I prefer to start in the center where my zipper tabs are, and I'll bring the needle down into the fabric so that it doesn't shift as it starts moving forward, and then I'll come down and sew the side and this side before I do the lining. Now you can see the lining has some loose folds in here. This here is where we top stitched and we finished top stitching here, and this section here hasn't been top stitched. And the reason I like to have that loose is that the top stitching, the extra bulk just from that row of stitching, contributes to those wonky corners that we have, and by not having those extra threads in there, it just removes a little bit of that excess bulk. I'll show you what I do with the loose fabric when we're at the machine. So for now, I'll put my needle down, making sure that the folds here are nice and even, and then I'll continue on down. Then I'll do this side. Then I'll turn it around and I'll start on the outer fabric. That way I'm reinforcing this section and come down and around. And I'll sew up this bottom edge at some stage. On the lining, I'll just leave an opening, 4 fingers or so, whatever's comfortable for you, and then we'll do some box corners. The rest of my fabric pieces are ready to go. I usually trim off these excess bits at the end when I'm cutting off the corners, and all my zips have been open. Once I've got my fabric secured underneath my presser foot, I'll lower my needle by hand and just sit that in the fabric, and that way when it starts sewing it's not going to shift on me. I want to make sure that this intersecting seam is still locked together, and I'll use my 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance to sew to the end. And remember to reduce your stitch length back to whatever you are using. Because I've got a lot of bulk here, I do like to reverse and then go forward again. Flip it over. I'll do the other side, bring my needle down again, start sewing. When I get to the end, I can turn my work around and sew up the bottom seam. You don't really need to worry about back stitching because we're going to be putting box corners at the bottom, and we'll be trimming that off later as well. With the outer fabric done, I'll start on the outer fabric, start sewing, turn your work and come along the bottom, back stitch, and then I'm just going to flip this over and start on the side again. It seems like it creates more work for yourself, but you'll actually have neater corners. So in here, where the lining is, it's a little bit floppy. I just take a screwdriver and push that fabric up to be in line with the fold along here, and the lining piece that's underneath, that's a bit floppy as well, I slide that underneath the zipper tab as well, and that will create the same fold that we've got from doing the top stitching, but it won't have those extra rows of stitching. And then you can continue on. Turn your work and sew up part of the bottom. When you've got enough of an opening there, backstitch. And this is now ready for me to box the corners. I've got all of these to do now, so all I'll do, instead of clipping everything together, I'll usually just do the folding at the machine, find that folded edge and pop that under my needle and start sewing, and do the same that I've just shown you. Alright, this has been sewn up all the way around. We've got our little opening here for turning through. The last thing I'm going to do is box the corners, and for this one I'm going to have a 2 centimetre box corner or 3/4 of an inch. So we've got our stitching line along here and along the bottom there, and that's where we're taking our measurement from. Doesn't need to be a very big box corner. We'll mark that out on all 4 corners and take your measurement from the stitching line. And if you want to, you can mark the other side as well. It's not necessary unless you're not very confident or you're a beginner, and by marking both sides it will help you find the straight line for sewing. Even though my fabric isn't even at the bottom here, I'm still taking the measurement from my stitching line. What you'll do now is separate the front and back fabric and bring the sides out until this becomes a point on this side as well. That will give us a nice straight line to stitch across. So you'll do that on all 4 corners. Pinch it out, grab the corners. This seam here is going in one direction, so I'm going to make sure that on this end it'll do the same, and then on this side I'll push that to the other side. Underneath we've got this seam here and this side seam. If you wiggle your fingers, you want to be able to push the fabric together so that the seams butt together. Might be easier to feel the difference when you open up the lining. So you bring out your point. So I'll have the seam at the back going to my left, the seam at the front going to my right, and you just want to wiggle the fabric across. So it's not as critical on your lining, but on your outer fabric you do want those seams to lock in place. So I'll go back to the machine and I'm going to sew up all the box corners on all of these bags, but instead of clipping and pinning, I'll just place that straight onto the bed of my machine. And the stitch plate on your machine has markings that are 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, 3/8 of an inch, and so on. This point here is what I line up with either the 1/2 inch or the 3/8 inch line on my stitch plate, and my needle will be in this position here. So then I'll just sew straight across there, rather than marking my box corners and taking the time to clip everything together. It's much quicker to just do this over at the sewing machine and use your stitch plate as a guide. I'll show you that when I get to it. All I need to do is sew straight across. Where I've got the seams overlapping each other, I'll backstitch over that just to reinforce it. And then I'll finish up the other corners. And that's the bag finished. All I need to do now is trim off these little ears. And I can turn the bag the right way out, poke out all the corners, and then we'll close it up. at the top of the bag here. You want to just stick your fingers in, and you can see that tab is coming out nicely there. It's nice and flat at the top. At the bottom we've got the seam matching up nicely, almost perfect. The side seam looks nice there too. If at all you're not happy with these, you can either re-stitch them or mark them down in price as seconds, which is what I do occasionally. So I've poked out the top corner there, and then all I need to do is pinch the edges together of the lining, tuck in any wispy bits, finger press that across, and sew it closed. And that's done. Then I'll take all the other bags and I'm going to do each corner on all of the bags exactly as I've shown you. So hopefully this will focus. You can see the lines I've got on my stitch plate here. That's my 1 inch line. There's a 3/4 inch line, then a 1/2 inch line. I've got the corner of the stitching line lining up with that 3/4 inch line, and my needle will be coming down across here. So that will give me the same distance across for my box corners. And if I do the same thing for every single one of them, then I'm going to have nice even box corners. All right, the last thing I've done is put on one of these little zipper pulls. These things here, you can just buy in packets of 100. You can buy assorted colours or black ones. And I just have an assortment of different ones. I use these now instead of putting tabs on the ends of my bags. It just saves a lot of time, and these are much cheaper to use than sewing up tabs for the side. I still have to try and get the crease out of the vinyl here and see if I can reduce the visibility of the staple marks a little bit. I'll get a hairdryer out and I'll see if I can fix that problem. If not, it doesn't matter. I'll leave the bags as they are. When I put them on my website, I will mention that you've got crease lines and staple holes in the fabric. That all adds to the story and the charm of the product. Having been rescued from going into landfill, that's where those sample swatches were going. Here are the other ones. Lots of great colours. I really love this one, the orange, the yellow on the back. Oh, this one too. Well, look, I think I love them all. So lots of great colours. I think these will do really well in the shop. So I've managed to make 11 of these. And out of the 2 green pieces of fabric that I had left over at the end, I've just made this very plain zippered pouch, which I'll sell a little bit cheaper than the others. So what did you think? Aren't there some fabulous colours in here? We've got the orange and yellow, grey, got a couple of green ones because I had that bigger piece of fabric, the teal, blue, a purple, lots of fabulous colours in here. I've taken photos of all of them and I'll pop them up on my website hopefully tonight sometime. And here's the one that we've done in today's video. I haven't stressed too much about the creases that are in the vinyl. I'm going to grab a hairdryer and see if I can remove some of those creases. And the staple marks, well, they're just going to be part of the story of recycling this fabric into something useful. If I can't reduce the visibility of the staple marks, it's just going to be a design feature. I don't think anybody's going to mind. Most of the people that purchase my products know the story behind the work that I do. They know that it's rescued fabric and that my aim is to use up whatever I can without it going into landfill. So I put the clock on and I timed myself making all of these bags. How long did it take me and how much am I going to sell them for? I usually have an idea in my mind what I'd like for the product. Then I'll quickly work out, okay, well, this is the amount of time that I'm allocating to making these and I need to try and beat that, which meant that taking into account the zips and anything else that I've purchased, plus my labour, I decided I needed to get this done in about 6 hours. And that's being pretty conservative. It took me 6 hours and 20 minutes to finish the whole project, including putting these little pulls on, and I've also taken photos to put them on my website, so that time has been factored into it as well. Also, all that time that it took me to remove the papers and the glue and prepare the fabric for sewing, that's all factored into my time as well. So it took me an hour to prepare all the fabric. We've got 11 of these bags. I'm only going to put 15 on this. All it is just a plain old boring upholstery bag. So it took me 6 hours and 20 minutes. My labour rate that I charge myself out at is $45 an hour. That's about to change. I'm probably going to put it up to about $60 an hour soon as I've worked out my costings. But that $45 an hour includes the current Australian minimum wage rate of about $26 an hour. So if I were working for somebody as a seamstress or a bag maker, I would be getting $26 an hour as my wage. The rest of that $45 includes machine maintenance, taxes, insurance, subscriptions, website fees, all of those costs that you have, which are part of running a business. It includes thread and, new blades for my rotary cutter and those sorts of things. So all of that is factored into that $45 an hour. For the material, I've got the zips, the zip slider and the zipper pulls. I've also got my fabric labels. And in this instance, the lining that's in here is new lining that I've actually purchased. It's part of my shop stock. So I did actually pay for the lining. Taking into account tabs, zips, labels and fabric, the total expense for each bag was $4. So if I multiply that by the 12 bags that I've got, that is $48 worth of material for all of these bags, plus labour charge out. So there you have it, my batch sewing processes, my costing. I hope that's really helpful for somebody. I get a lot of emails and comments for people wanting to start their own handmade business. The best thing you can do for your handmade business is invest in some labels, even if they're just cheap ones. These are nothing pretty, but they sell the bags. So I do hope this is really helpful for anybody wanting to invest their time into handmade sales. Just be confident in yourself and your abilities, and don't listen to those people that say, I can make this for much cheaper. The ones that are interested in your story, the ones that like your products, they're the ones that are going to buy what you make. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.